And how's it going, everyone? And welcome to No Fun Allowed. Today, you are joined by a very special guest, several of my awesome patrons. And today, we are discussing all about player character death in our tabletop role playing games, about how it affects us, about how it affects the players, affects the story, and whatever else comes up. So, say hi, guys.
Hello, everybody.
Hi there.
Yeah, so let's kick it off. If you followed a lot of my content, you may have discovered that I actually have been known to kill a PC or two, or dozens, or at this point hundreds. But I wanted to discuss with you guys what's you guys' experience like in killing PCs. So Randy, where are you at right now in the PC death department?
I think I'm probably a little bit softer than most people. I know DMs that are just happy to just like you've got no chances. But if you've got inspiration that you've forgotten about and you're rolling your last death save, I'll be like, don't forget about that because that can keep you going. But you've still got to have that threat, absolutely, of actually my player can die. I can't just roam into every single area, especially when you're playing certain modules and certain homebrews where you know that you could just walk into a zone which is just super high level. Perhaps you're never going to be able to fight your way out of it. Like you've got to have that threat still, so you're not just running in and swiping.
Okay, and what about you, Marshall?
Oh, yes. I've got three player skulls and one animal companion skull on my DM screen, so
Okay.
I'm a little kind as well. Uh, but you talk to my players and they may give you a different answer. But yeah, not too many player deaths.
Okay. It's interesting because, depending on the game system that you run, depending on, how long you've been DMing for, and most important of all, the kind of players that you have, that'll really dictate the source of how many player character deaths you have. When I started running very high fantasy, epic noir sort of style, and PC Death was non existent. It just never came up. But then I started running games where that started to trickle in. And then it really kicked off in my little community when I started running West Marches games, and PC death was a very common occurrence. So, in regards to that, do you think that PC death belongs in every sort of campaign, in every sort of setting, in every sort of game system? Or do you think that there is a fine line between what is fun in the game and PC death has nothing to do with it?
Um, I'll say no, it doesn't belong in every campaign. And the first thing that pops to my mind is playing for younger children. Obviously, you reskin death as something else, or starting over, or you lost your bag of candy during your Halloween trick or treating, something like that. But that's an extreme example. But for the most part, I would say it definitely does belong in there for our age group and whatnot. I could see maybe a throwaway example that death doesn't occur, but that would be an extreme.
Yeah, I think that threat of dying is part of the game, especially D&D 5e. That you've got to have that in the back of your mind. Like I said earlier, to just prevent players from doing absolutely anything they want and thinking they're these gods in these games. Sometimes they need a little slap on the wrist to be like, whoa, whoa, whoa! Actually, there's also bigger forces at play here. So yeah, I think in D&D it does belong in every game. Like I say, you might be a bit softer with your example of children, or if it's like your first
Right.
session, you're just introducing new people into the game, you might be a little bit more relaxed about it. But yeah, in most cases, I think it belongs.
Yeah, I've ran for kids, and all the time is never any expression at all of danger of death. When I run for kids, they don't even kill people either, right? When I run for kids, typically they go up against skeletons or something that they don't necessarily kill. And if they do go up against a person, then they just beat them up. They never actually kill them. But in regards of, when I run for actual, non-children, for sure I
Yeah.
have death implemented in there all the time. And I think it's really unique to think about how you divert so much time, money, and effort into this character, and there's that threat looming there of them dying. It's obviously we've seen a tonality change in tabletop role playing games over the years, where we look at the first editions of all the tabletop games, and PC Death was at the drop of a hat. Versus nowadays, we find that we have now very little death. Do you think that tonality change has been a welcome one, or do you think that you want to see a return of the days of old?
Return of Days of Old. Well, I don't know who you're referring to, this old man sitting here. Uh, no, I actually do prefer 5e, the mechanics and whatnot. It is definitely favored towards the PC. Like I think I heard a quote of saying something like 60% in the favor of the PC, but I like that versus the old blue and teal box set of oh, you don't have your 10-foot pole? You didn't press that stone in front of you? Oh, well, you're mush now. It's like, what? Yeah, start rolling up a new character. We'll get to you in about an hour. So, no, I do prefer it this way.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. I haven't got as much experience with the other editions, but I've heard that they can be more brutal and unforgiving, if you're not prepared for the situation, like you say. But I do encourage, like, if you're in a sort of a situation where death may be occurring and you've got this sort of inspirational idea that might get you out of it, like I will favor those sort of creative players who have those ideas, which can overcome the situation.
For sure. I've DM'd a lot of 5e, and I've just now recently been delving into the OSR, replicating the days of old, and it is a very stark contrast to see where I run a game of 5th edition and it's sunshine and rainbows, and then I run a game of OSE and they go into a dungeon with 12 retainers and only 7 retainers walk out alive, right? It is a very interesting change of pace, as it were. And for me personally, I like that variety. I need to have that variety in a sense. I want to have games where death I don't really care about. It's never going to happen really. And then I can have games which are super gonzo, hyper lethal. But what it really comes down to is the players that I'm DMing for, right? I need to find people that are okay and willing to accept that their PC may die. And then if I'm running the happy-go-lucky game, I need to have people that aren't willing to abuse the system, as it were. And that is something with 5e in particular we see is the invention of the death saving throws and the lack of save or die spells and the fact that a level 5 fighter can drop 200 feet from the sky and walk away somehow, right? We see a lot of these things, and
It's
it definitely adds to the sense and purpose of the game. But in regards of a character death, is death permanent in majority of your campaigns, or does death just is it a speed bump? What's the kind of tone that you're going for permanency of death?
Well, we are playing a fantasy role-playing game, so death isn't permanent. It may be at lower level because by the time that player replaces that character and continues on, and they get to tier 2 and 3 when death really is just a speed bump. Now, they've forgotten about that lower level characters. Oh, maybe we should go back and it's like, who? So, yeah, I think it depends upon the tier.
Yeah, and I think also it depends on what the player wants to do. If a character dies, sometimes you can get a sense from them that actually they really do want to keep going with that character, and perhaps the party has spells and resources available to revive that character. Perhaps they don't, and they sort of give the DM a nod and say, "Look, is there anything I can do?" And that's when really you're in control as the DM, and you can be like, "Look, you can come back, but your God has given you this exact purpose that you're going to have to do. Maybe even you've got a new floor, or perhaps there's some sort of dark deal that you're going to need to make in order to be revived, and it will have some sort of fun consequence. And really, sometimes death isn't even the worst thing. Sometimes undeath and being resurrected again could be sort of worse than that in a way, but it can always add to the story.
I mean, if you want to talk about old school play, instead of your character dying, one of the worst things that could happen is your armor gets destroyed, or you lose levels from level drain or energy drain or whatever. Like, that really sucks, right? But
yes.
absolutely. So in regard to that, then, I've heard of people running Dark Souls like games where death is literally just a reset. But me personally, I always find that I like there to be a cost of death. I like there to be something that your players have to, give up or attain or chase after. I like that idea of them making deals, whether they be with good entities or bad entities, giving up a portion of their loot. Now, the next quest you have to do this one exact thing now. I always like that because that gives a sense of weight to death. And yeah, in 5e in particular, we have the low cost of Revivify. But, of course, there's a lot of times where Revivify is not going to work because it only lasts for, if they've only been dead for the past minute. If you're in an extended combat or the body gets dragged away or whatever, then you need to go to the extraneous circumstances, and that's what I always love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, then there needs to be a cost. Otherwise, my fear is that the players are going to go into this all willy-nilly, don't check for traps. Oh, everybody head in, and oh, we're up against, a couple of monsters whose CR is well beyond us. Oh, who cares? Our DM will let us go. There's no consequences. Yes, there's consequences. You need to think hard about what you're doing. Otherwise, you lose that sense of, yes, it's a fantasy game, but you want it to be real. You're sitting here having a fantasy. You want it to feel alive, real, and so there needs to be a consequence.
Yeah,
I think the majority of players like that as well, because it suits most people's sort of style of play. Is that actually I can't just run in and stab this thing. I've got to think about the other options that are available to me. Maybe even just trying to talk my way into a situation and overcome it that way rather than getting into combat. Is the better way forward, and it really sort of does reward as well those more creative players who aren't just those murder hobos running in.
Yeah, it is very important to come in with a certain mentality, and that's another thing I want to talk about too. Is I've run all these different types in various games. I'm curious what y'all have experienced in regards of metagaming. Do people come into a game and they say, "Oh, you as the DM, oh, you're totally gonna take it easy, so we're just gonna do whatever the frick we want," or do they come in and be like, "Oh, they're gonna murder us. I'm not gonna put any thought or care into my character if we're all just gonna die"? Have you guys experienced any metagaming of that sort?
I wouldn't say with thinking that you're a soft DM or a hard DM. I suppose maybe you have to ask my players for that. I don't know what they say off the table, but yeah, I think there's that line where, as a DM, you realize when the players are actually sort of not taking you for granted necessarily, but maybe leaning on your goodwill a little bit too much, and then you can sort of bring that back in to bring that sense of dread back in and the threat again of death. I think it's a little bit of a balance there to stop that metagaming from happening.
Yeah, I've had we all play with our very good friends, and I've got a couple that are at my current table, and they ask me to do something, and it says in this rule book right here in the DMG, it's a variant rule, but it says it there. Can I do it? And I'm going, yes, and then I regret it. And it's like, oh, and he has something very powerful now, and it's like, okay, well, I've let it go for him. I have to let it go for the others, but it's as the DM, it's my responsibility to ramp up the game and make sure it's a equal or better challenge for them now that they've got more resources. It's like, what's the fun of going up in against an ancient red dragon and you blow it away in 2 rounds? That's not fun. Even though
Yeah.
you got these wonderful magic items and whatnot, it's like 2 rounds. No, you want to sweat it out. At least I feel that, I want combat to last like 5 rounds. And I was like, oh my God, I had 2 death saves and somebody else saved me at the last minute. That was fantastic. That's stories you tell for years on end.
For sure. I'm probably not going to remember the time that you killed the goblins on turn 1, right? Like you've done that a billion times, right? But the times where you go up against the beholder and the magic user's completely worthless, and then the fighter can't do anything because the beholder's floating 20 feet in the air, but you somehow still pull it out. Like those are definitely the times that I remember, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, the
yeah.
last minute crits. That's it.
Mm-hmm. And in the stories that we tell of our characters' lives and deaths, I find is really unique because I feel like a lot of times, whenever people are describing their characters' lives and deaths, they never say, "Oh, my character did this." They usually say, "I did this," and I think it's a very important and telling vernacular, right? The fact that people are so ingrained with their character that they're willing to say it in a first person perspective. And I think that's a really cool thing that we see.
I think it's a very good sign too that you've got a good table there and you've got a good story going on and you've immersed your players. If that's what's going on, buddy, fantastic. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's another thing too, is we immerse ourselves in these adventures and these stories. And once again, drawing up on the old school versus the new school mentality. In the old school mentality, we did see a lot of sandboxy style adventures where your players just show up and they do a thing. But nowadays, we're more involved with grandiose plots. We're involved in these crazy epic save the world or save the region, save and do whatever. And a lot of time we feel like character death actually limits the storytelling in a sense because it removes a portion of what the adventure is trying to be, what the story is we're trying to tell. So in regards to that, when you are running any of these, let's say these 5th edition modules or any of your homebrew adventures, is there any apprehension to killing PCs because you think that it'll throw off the story?
Typically don't have PCs involved in like the overarching story as a whole. So if a player character did die, then the big bad guy is still going to do the thing that he's doing. But I think the way that I do it is try and intertwine the players' stories somehow into parts of the plot. And I do have those sort of apprehensive times when I'm like, oh no, please don't die on this situation because I've got something incredible planned if you can just get into the next room. Like, and I do think to myself, what is going to happen if I do this? I'm going to have to come up with something else. And usually it turns out absolutely fine. But it definitely does happen like that.
It's scary, Randy. You've devoted yourself to this storyline and you've got this thing that you want to happen with this PC. He's maybe not integral, but the next key to the plot is on him. It's in the next room. Third death save failed. Bye. It's like, what do I do? How do I save the plot? I don't know. I'm fearful of it. I can't remember it ever happening to me, but I would take a second guess at those dice and go, maybe you saved. Yeah, I don't know, Randy.
Yeah, I'm thinking I've probably had it twice now where I've had a story and it was hinging on, okay, this character is gonna learn this piece of information and then they're the only person that's gonna know it for a certain reason, and then they die right before I'm about to tell them. And then I have to think to myself, okay, I've gotta somehow spill the beans somehow in some manner that isn't, an ex machina, right? But I've tried to find, I try to run games where that isn't the case because, just for that exact reason. Just in case, if one PC dies or even all but one dies, that's a tough sell. But a obviously really tough sell is a going campaign and a full TPK. Have any of you ever mounted a TPK?
I've no TPKs so far.
Okay.
No TPK. I've been in a TPK last year, just before COVID hit.
Oof.
Uh, but I have not been responsible for it. Responsible? I don't know.
Were you responsible as the player then for the
Oh
TPK?
no! Oh,
Okay.
never my fault. I think we were all idiots when we went into a small room against like 5 manticores, and it was 3 of us. That was stupid on all of our. Oh yeah, yeah, not smart at all.
It was a combined effort for the TPK.
Yes, yes. We all had fun. It was interesting being in it, but I may have, every person has a different attitude of character death. So, got adults who are going to act like adults, have adults who are not.
Oh yes. I've unfortunately experienced the other side of that for sure. I've TPK'd a few times in my career,
Mm,
uh, both as a player and as a DM, but mostly as a DM because I'm mostly DM. When it comes to running one shots, I don't care about a TPK. As long as it was a fun adventure, that's fine. But TPKs in a structured adventure where they've actually put time and effort into it, and I still want the story to continue, that's
yeah.
definitely the harder sell. That's definitely one of those things where when I TPK, I have to think to myself, okay, instead of them dying outright, maybe they got captured by the bad guys. Maybe someone comes in to save them at the last minute. Maybe they get warped into a different reality. I've had to come up with a lot of different scenarios for a full-blown
Mm.
campaign to handle a TPK. But the worst part is, if I run for the same players, I've got to come up with something new every time. That's the worst part. So, when I run it
Yes, you
for
do.
newer players, I can just reuse the same old tricks. But DMing for the same people, yeah, you get to build an awesome rapport and get to build awesome shared stories. But then that just makes my life harder.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's good to hear that most people aren't TPKing their parties, because I imagine that if most people are TPKing their parties all the time, it'd probably get real old real quick. Once again, though, that does come down to the buy-in of the game, and that is something I want to talk about. Is we might have our own reputations as individuals of, okay, we DM this style of way, we run these style of adventures, we DM for this long, we do this, we do that. But when you actually go down to run an adventure, do you have those expectations down on the table? Do you tell your players immediately, okay, this is the story, this is the kind of this is the kind of game that I'm going to run. The player death is expected, it's not expected. Is that in your session zeros?
Yeah, absolutely. There's whether it's a dedicated session zero or it's just sort of a quick 5 minute at the beginning of the first session, just to say, just to let you know, player death in this campaign. Maybe it's Rime of the Frost Maiden or Curse of Strahd in particular. Like these are brutal, hard campaigns, and you can expect a character or two to die at some point, or even more of you. And I think assessing that and giving that up front, it not only helps to sort of set those expectations early on in the campaign, but you can also use it to build that tension and apprehension as part of the story as well, because they know, actually, wow, I've just been told I'm going into like this area. I'm not going to be able to leave for this reason. Talking about and there's highly likely that I could walk into an area which is high level, and there's no resurrection that I'll be able to have. That sets the tone. It lets them know, like, okay, maybe have a backup character just in case, but also
Mm.
but also it's death is a possibility.
Oh yeah, at session zero, that's where you're setting your tone. Here are, as you said, the expectations. And oh, by the way, I I will kill you. See,
Yeah.
see these skulls on my DM screen? They mean something. Don't go there.
Yeah, and it's
So,
also
yeah.
it's also not saying necessarily like you will die, but there are occasions that you may not be able to win through fighting alone. Sometimes I need to remind the players. I don't know if they're going to watch this, but I need to remind the players, like, guys, you can't win every encounter through violence. Like sometimes you might need to run away. Sometimes you might need to beg. You might need to get on your knees and beg to the drow matriarch. Like, I'm so sorry for my other player character who's being all mouthy. Like, he doesn't mean it. I'm so sorry, and back out of the room. You know, sometimes those occasions, those humbling occasions, are going to come up.
Absolutely. You know, as much as some modules try to push it, level 1 PCs cannot kill a full-grown mammoth, right? It's just not gonna happen. As much as some people think that can happen, it's not gonna happen.
Where were you like 5 sessions ago in Icewind Dale? Where were you? That
Should
was
I have
one
been
of
the
my
voice of reason?
That was, oh, there was no voice of reason. Yep, Mammoth killed one of the PCs outright. Did something stupid. It's like, why did you do? Yep.
Yeah, but here's the other portion of that too is, while it is sad for some characters to die, if a single character or some characters die, then it's a learning experience, not only for the other characters, but also very importantly for the other players, right? They learn that, hey, as level 1 characters, we can't deal with a mammoth. Maybe we'll come back in a few levels, right? You know, I think it is very important to get those learning experiences, because you can sort of look at a lot of adventures as an MMO in a sense, right? You could sit there and say, okay, we understand that, you know, beyond this border, there is higher level monsters. Okay, we know that in that dungeon, there is a trap that does a bunch of damage, and we don't want to do that right now. But we can come back to that later. I do like to see that progression in games, and I imagine a lot of people do. I imagine a lot of people like to see their pathetic little level 1 characters grow up to be somebodies. And
Well,
yeah.
in my campaign, the mammoth is definitely a threat, and it's like off in the distance. You see, yep, we're going this way now. Yep.
Yeah.
But as you said, give them a couple of more levels. They're going to say off in the distance. You see, let's go for it. It's going to be fun for them, but not yet.
Not yet. You know, overcoming those challenges is an awesome experience, because you know you have a partial party wipe. And then people say, we're going to get revenge, but we're going to get it later. And then once they finally do it, they can say, that was for you, Billy, you know. they can finally get that sweet, sweet vengeance. But something we've been talking about is the involuntary character death, when, you know, characters step out of line by accident, or they do something stupid, or they just get unlucky. Something that I've actually heard of quite frequently is voluntary character death, where someone says, oh, I want to play a new character, or I wanted to just do something else. I want my character to die. How do you guys feel about people, specifically your players, showing up and saying, hey, could you kill my character?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a player myself who did that. One of my first characters. I think got to like level 7, and I'd already created probably about 60 different characters in the meantime. But I had one particular one,
Randy.
I had a particular one that I did want to play, and I spoke to my DM at the time. I was like, look, I'm absolutely loving the campaign. It's nothing to do with that. Like, I just want to switch up my character. Is there an opportunity for even my character to die, preferably in a sort of heroic way, if possible, or a really surprising or memorable way? Or alternatively, is there a way that he can sort of just like retire or go off and do his own thing and come back later? And it ended up with that character actually seeing a Bodak for the first time, and rolling a natural one when he had a look. And it was a really sudden moment, and because the other players at the table saw that happen, and I was like, my character's dead, and all he did was look at him. Like, all this monster did was look at him. It was a really memorable moment, and as you said earlier, like the other party members, the other characters really wanted to like rise up and defeat the enemy that struck down their companion, and it really brought everyone together.
Oh, fine. Yeah, fantastic. Well, great way to go, Bodak. Yeah, that'll put the fear of God into everybody. Uh, I agree. You should be able to start over, but I also think that it's part of the house rules that you make. It's like, okay, we understand if it's not gelling for you. Here's the way. If you want a mulligan for and just get another character, here. Uh, I'll add on to that. I have heard of the players that I'm a member of. One table did have a player who abused it and just started over and over and over, like every 3 weeks. Nope, I'm going to start over. Here, ripped it up, and it's like so we had to tweak the rules where one mulligan. But
Okay.
I agree. Yeah, sometimes you're just not gelling with it. It's not what you expected.
Yeah, that's definitely something I've noticed is in today's day and age, we see a lot of people, much like Randy here, draw up 70,000 characters, and then you finally bring them to the table. But something I've noticed is 100% of the time, that character concept you've got burning right there, all the text and all the stats and all the abilities, it never works out 100% like you thought it was going to. Whether that be because it's not a right fit for the campaign, or the DM's not, working it into the campaign as much as you wanted to, or whatever the case may be. And I do see, a lot of people who say, okay, maybe this character isn't the right fit. I'll introduce a better character for this. I personally have never had anybody explicitly tell me that they want to die, but what ends up happening is they just tell me, hey, I think my character, they fulfilled their arc and they actually would retire. And I think retirement is a perfectly acceptable answer because most human beings, or humanoids in this case, aren't suicidal, right? Most humanoids aren't. So, it makes sense that you go out, you get loot, and then you're presumably far, far richer than most people, and then you simply go off and start a tavern and then talk about how you took an arrow to the knee, right? That's what you do. So I personally have not experienced anybody telling me that, but I have had experiences where a character died, and they tell me, "Oh yeah, this was actually perfect timing because I did want to try out something else." And I say, "Oh, it worked out narratively. It worked out, just perfectly fine."
That's interesting. I never heard of a retirement as a way of getting out, but it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean,
Nice.
something to
Very
note
nice.
is, in these games, your character is going against crazy monsters. They're seeing death and destruction, and they're doing this, doing that. It is pretty
Mhm.
reasonable to think that a lot of characters would end up having like PTSD, right? It's very it'd be very commonplace that people would be stressed out of their mind if they're going up against aliens that can blow up people's brains, and then you go up
Yeah.
against a bear with an owl beak. Like, these things just aren't natural, and if you get beat up and you're near death all the time, eventually you're gonna walk away, right? Unless it's just so lucrative to the point where you want to go out. But we never
Mm.
we typically, when we make characters, we don't think about the sad things like that. We think about the fun things like getting loot and killing
Oh yeah.
monsters, right? And
Yeah.
speaking of that, we talk about all this character death. What do you guys feel about a whole bunch of NPC death? About those hirelings, henchmen, retainers, mercenaries, friends, and foes that the party regularly interacts with. We
They're not real.
we
Slaughter them all.
slaughter them all.
What are you talking about?
Okay.
No, no. I I think it says something about us as DMs and players when you start to invest yourself in an NPC of all things, and people start to take care of them and sacrifice leveled spells to save them. That says something about the campaign. So I was joking before. old school NPC, yeah, you're going first. You're checking for traps. That's what you did. And you lost, 3 or 4 people, per dungeon. No, I want the investment.
Yeah, definitely. There's the investment in NPCs, especially if they end up joining the party for even just a small travel to the next town or whatever. It's giving them a personality and giving them their own sort of bonds and ideals and their own desires and what they're trying to achieve themselves, and seeing where that matches up to the party, so that they're both the party and these NPCs are involved with each other, and they share perhaps these common goals to some extent. And if there is an NPC death, then it makes it makes it more shocking and really a part of the story as well. Like, oh, I really loved that NPC. I can't believe that's happened. And it can actually have a similar effect to another player characters dying of rallying the party again and saying like, look, we know we can't defeat that thing that's killed our NPC friend, but we will come back later once we've leveled up again, and we'll get revenge for this totally made up character. And it uses a plot point. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I've had a lot of PC death, and sometimes when PCs die, oh, it's sad. But then I've also had NPCs die, and then there's a crusade that's mounted, to avenge this NPC. That is an awesome feeling when you come up with a few lines of script, or it's just in the text right there, you make them come to life, and then all of a sudden, all of your players are mounting, to fight the evil crusader, the evil tyrant, because they killed Boblin the Goblin, right? Like, that's just such an awesome experience. And as much as we mourn character death, NPC death is a pretty big factor in the game as well. Because hopefully your players are getting invested in the world that is presented in front of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are of course times when the Emerald Enclave will just give you 5 of these grunts, and they're expendable. You do send them in first. The enemies do just destroy them first, so you can get some spells off. And there are those occasions, but yeah, definitely those NPCs which have more of the personality, they have an impact when it comes to death.
I throw red shirts at my party all the time. People just to soak up damage, soak up the hits, just flesh out the numbers. And I've also found that when I throw, my party like 6, 8, 10 people, and all of a sudden, 4 of them come out of there alive, then that's when they start finally getting attached to these people. They say, "Oh, you were awesome. You somehow ducked out of the way of that one attack I rolled a nat 1 on," or, "Oh, you're the one that got that crit and actually killed that monster, even though you only did like 4 damage with your crit." I love that feeling of throwing in nobodies, but then it's the players themselves that make these nobodies somebodies. And then that makes it all the much sweeter and sadder when those characters die.
Oh, nice. Yes. Very good.
Yeah, so, character death, I certainly think, is an intrinsic part of what makes tabletop role-playing games special, as without the fear of death, what is the point of life in tabletop role-playing games? TLDR, obviously, this does not apply to real life, right? Without the threat of death, I do find that combat is meaningless. If I know for a fact that my character can't die, then why would I bother rolling initiative, right? And that's why I love having character death in the game. Not because I'm this evil scumbag that says, you lose, I win. It's because I want people to feel a certain kind of way. And I know that they're going to feel a certain kind of way if they get that much more attached to their characters. Do you guys have any final thoughts on character deaths?
I would say if a character does die, don't just say, "Oh, you've failed your last death save. Who's next in initiative?" Give him a little bit of a story. Give him a little bit of a description about how it's happened and how everything goes in slow mo, and you're breathing your last breath, and your party members are looking on, desperately trying to do stuff, and just make it seem special, because there's some characters you could have had for weeks, months. You've been playing it for a year or two, and a character death always deserves that extra bit of respect and extra bit of love at those last moments.
Absolutely, Randy. I've stolen it from some of the best GMs out there, but one of my house rules is on character death, famous last words. Doesn't matter what the situation is. Come on, here's your moment to shine. Yep, your last shining moment, but give it to us. What is it? You know?
Now I'm just thinking of being a scumbag and casting a silence spell on someone as they die.
I am never playing with you. What in the world?
Wow.
I'm just thinking of that sad moment. Famous, like, what do you say is your last words? Oh, no one can hear you.
Oh, I could see mid-sentence. It's like silence. It's like...
Well, once again, no pitchforks and torches. I swear, I'm not a cruel and evil DM. I swear. Yeah, absolutely. I do think that you should give that people the spotlight as their character dies. Everyone should get a round of drinks. Everyone should hail to the dead.
Yep.
There should be a fun ceremony involved to alleviate the sadness, because we come together to have fun as a group, and character death may sting, but the fact that it stings means that it's meaningful, right? And that's what makes character death truly beautiful. So thank you both for joining me today about talking about character deaths in our games. That was an absolute blast. We covered a whole bunch of topics, and I hope everybody learned a little bit something new here. So that's going to do it for us. Thank you for watching. Thanks for listening. And thank you to my amazing patrons. You guys are absolutely incredible. And I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.